You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. Ed Orgeron on Wednesday was at the Rotary Club of Baton Rouge. Last public appearance for the coach before the start of fall camp next week. Tigers report on the 5th, and they begin practice on the 6th. And we did talk a good bit about what Ed Orgeron had to say about the quarterbacks and the offensive line and how we had a good time, sort of at the Rotary Club. He did also talk about his coordinators. And some of this he's told before, but it's a good opportunity to remind you and let you hear now on the precipice of camp how those conversations went and what the expectation is. First of all, this was Ed Orgeron talking about the interview process, which we've talked a lot about here, admittedly, since Ed Orgeron acknowledged he did not interview candidates last year, including Bo Pelini, which ended terribly. But clearly, he took a very different approach this year, and we're going to see if it pays off.
I wanted coaches that can communicate with our players. So I interviewed every one of them personally. And I just said, hey, I'm a football player. I'm an LSU football player. I didn't tell them that. And I'm going to ask them questions. And I want to see how they relate to me. And all 6 of these guys rated A+.
I want to see how they communicate with our players. This is what Ed Orgeron had to say about why he hired Daronte Jones to replace Bo Pelini.
The reason I hired Daronte Jones is his expertise on the back end. He's from the Miami Vikings, from Mike Zimmer's school, and my expertise on the front end. So I thought he and I made a great match. I told him what we wanted to run on defense. We wanted to run a 4-3 defense. He knew exactly what I wanted to run. So those guys, I think, are going to be a tremendous fit.
Ed Orgeron also mentioned that he's been a part of 5 national championship teams, and 4 of them ran a 4-3 defense. Now, the exception was 2019 with Dave Aranda running a 3-4. But that does also speak to what Ed Orgeron wants and why he and Dave Aranda, while Dave was incredibly successful and, in my opinion, the best defensive coordinator in college football, but they didn't see eye to eye on what they thought a defense should look like. What they were doing was working, but it's not what Ed wanted to do. And he's the head coach, and he's going to have final say. So he brought in Bo Pelini. That didn't work. But now Ed can run the front of the defense. Daronte Jones can sort of be in charge, as you said there, with the expertise in the back end. You have Corey Raymond now in that slot where he's coaching the entire secondary instead of just cornerbacks. Hopefully there's more communication, more continuity defensively. This was the kicker. And I'll say it again. LSU defensively allowed 34.9 points per game. It was the worst defensive season in the history of LSU football. Your talent is dramatically better than 34.9 points per game. It's on Daronte Jones to make them play at that level, which Bo Pelini could not do. On the other side of the ball, of course, Steve Ensminger retires. You had the Scott Linehan decision was a disaster. It's one of those where you had George Munoz in the queue after Joe Brady left. It would have been such a natural decision just to elevate George Munoz to a full-time on-field role. Didn't do it. Munoz goes to Baylor. They bring in Linehan. It blows up. Well, to your good fortune, you have Munoz back this year, but again, in an off-field role. And here is why Ed Orgeron hired Jake Peetz and DJ Mangas.
I wanted the 2019 offense back. What do you guys think? Yeah? Yeah, no question. I don't think I can bring Joe back, but I can bring the offense back. Derek Panansky called Joe. I said, who can run the offense? He said, Coach, 2 guys, Jake Peetz and DJ Mangas. I said, bring them over. I interviewed both of them. I told them exactly what we wanted, exactly how I expected to be run, and they agreed totally on it, and those guys have been phenomenal.
That is going to be fascinating because for me, I don't think the offense last year was a problem. I think as an offense that scored 32 points with 2 freshman quarterbacks starting 7 of your 10 games, without a solid running game, with your number 1 receiver, Biletnikoff Award winner, opting out, and then for the end of the season, your other number 1, your next number 1, Terrace Marshall, opting out, and then you also saw Eric Gilbert opt out for the last 2 games. Considering how much turnover you had and how young you were on offense, to have put up 32 points a game last year, that wasn't your problem. The challenge for this team is going to be getting better offensive line play, to be able to play ball control and run the football if you need to, and watching the development of these 2 quarterbacks. I think a massive part of that is not Jake Peetz and DJ Mangas. That's George Munoz. In 2019, Joe Brady wasn't working with quarterbacks in 2019. Joe Brady was a receivers guy. Joe Brady worked with the receivers. Quarterbacks was Steve Ensminger and George Munoz. I think having Munoz back in the building is an asset we're not talking much about right now, but for the development of Miles Brennan and Max Johnson and Garrett Nussmeier, but the 2 guys that we actually think are going to play this year, having George Munoz back in the building is massive. But I don't believe offense was LSU's problem last year. I don't believe it's going to be their problem this year. They're going to score. They're going to score enough on every team they play to win the game. The question is, how much better will they be defensively? We'll start to get that answer pretty soon. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.